Hello, and welcome to the Collective Church podcast. These messages are from our Sunday services at the Collective Church in Boise, Idaho. If you are new with us or just checking us out, please visit our website at collectivechurch.org. We would love to hear from you and connect with you. We pray that this message is both uplifting and encouraging.
Happy Father's Day to all you dads. If you are not a dad, we are thankful you're here. We are going to take some time today to talk about men. And I would contend that it's hard being a human, but I also think it's confusing being a man. So we're going to take some time today, and I want to offer a few thoughts on David and his pursuit of the calling that God had on his life. And then I want to offer a few thoughts on masculinity as well. So I want you to get your hearts and your minds ready as we jump into this today. My dad is also not here. He's at home with COVID, so happy Father's Day, Dad. But they're recovering well. His birthday was a couple weeks ago, and so I called him up and said, "Hey, Dad, I've never been to a shooting range, and I would love for us to go hang out and do this on Father's Day, or on your birthday, if that's all right." I said, I just never done it, so I figured it was time to give it a shot. And he's, okay, all right. That was a true story, by the way. That was a true story. Okay, enough with the jokes. Seriously, open your Bibles. Yeah, open your Bibles. 1 Samuel chapter 17 is where we're going to start. And I'm going to take us back a little bit to chapter 16. And I want us to spend some time thinking, processing. And again, I have a few thoughts on David and really what set him apart. So I've got some of this, I've got a lot of this on the screen. I want to walk us through sort of a narrative of this story of David. And we're going to I want to start in chapter 17, verse 8, and then we're going to back up just a little bit. But this is where we're going to start. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me." Now, there's a lot that happened leading up to this moment, and there's a whole lot that happens and unfolds just after this moment. So I want to take some time to jump into that. See, the previous chapter 16, there's this great man of God. His name's Samuel. And Samuel gets a word from God, and it is, "I'm ready for you to go and anoint the next king of Israel." Now, there was already a king. It was the first human king that would rule over Israel, and his name was Saul. But Saul was not a good king. Saul was really not a good man. And so God wanted and was searching for someone after his own heart. So he said, "Samuel, I want you to go to Bethlehem, go to Jesse's house, and there I will show you who to anoint as the next king of Israel." So Samuel heads to Bethlehem, goes to Jesse's house, and the first person he sees is Jesse's oldest son. His name was Eliab. And this was his response. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, "Surely this is the Lord's anointed standing here before the Lord." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Now, their first king, Saul, was tall, strong, handsome, probably eerily similar to Eliab. And so the moment that Samuel sees this person standing before him, he thinks, this is going to be easy. There he is. And then the Lord impresses on his heart, listen, this is not the way it works. People look at the things on the outside, but the Lord examines, dives deeper, and jumps into the heart. And so what Jesse did is he had his sons, one by one, stand before Samuel. 7 of them all together. And one by one, Samuel would stand in front of him and go, "Not the one. Nope, not the one. Not him either." 7 different times that happens. And so he asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" "Well, they're still the youngest," Jesse answered. "He's tending the sheep." Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." So he sent for him and had him brought in. He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. The Lord said, "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil, anointed him in the presence of his brothers, and from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. And Samuel then went to Ramah. Now, that is a powerful moment in the life of David, a powerful moment in the life of his dad, Jesse, maybe a little bit confusing even, because Jesse also thought he had it figured out. There's a reason he started with Eliab and then worked his way on down, and didn't even consider that his youngest, and some commentators talk about this as the son of no account. And we're not sure all that goes into that, but he didn't seem to have anything to offer from Jesse's perspective that would make him the least bit considerable for this position. And so he leaves him in the field. Now, it says that the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him from that day forward. Now, when Saul became king, the Spirit of the Lord also rested upon him so that he could begin to rule and judge and act appropriately. But even with that, Saul resisted everything that the Lord had in store for him and decided to go his own way, which happens sometimes, instead of the direction that the Lord wanted him to go in. And so it says in the scriptures that the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul. So that which was on him was now off of him and was actually on David. Now, when the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, it created room, it created space. And the Bible tells us that an evil spirit came and tormented Saul, came and tormented him on a consistent basis. Now, he wanted to find relief from this. And the only relief he actually could find is if someone would come in and play an instrument known as the lyre. And so Saul's servants went out in search for someone who could do this really, really well. It says, one of the servants answered. This is Saul's servants out looking for someone who could play the lyre. "I have seen the son of Jesse of Bethlehem who knows how to play the lyre. He's a brave man and a warrior. He speaks well and is a fine-looking man, and the Lord is with him." Now, up to this moment, you've got young David, and we don't know exactly how old he is, but likely he's roughly 15 years old. And he was anointed as king, the next king at 15. He wasn't inaugurated until he was 30. So there's this 15-year period of time in which God uses to develop David into the person that he's going to become to lead the people of God into the future. Now, at a very young age, he gets anointed. The Spirit of the Lord comes on him, and he then returns to the field to shepherd his father's flocks. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm David, I'm thinking, I was just anointed the next king. Find someone else to tend these sheep. But not David. David goes back out into the field, out into this quiet, private space, and begins to do what he had done for a long time. He shepherded his father's flocks. But interestingly enough, this servant had come in contact with David, this servant of Saul. And the words out of this servant's mouth was, "He's a brave man and a warrior." Listen, to this point, we have no record of David doing anything other than what we've already read, shepherding his father's flocks. But there was something this servant saw about the life of young David that said, this is a brave man and a warrior. And he'd never been to battle. There was something about David's nature and his character, his presence, and what even felt like his purpose that gave this servant the words, a brave man and a warrior. And so after being anointed, this is what happened with David. He went back and forth between service to Saul, playing the lyre, when he felt tormented, that would soothe and ease that torment he was experiencing. And then back to his father's fields to shepherd the flocks. And then back to Saul's. And then back to his dad's. Back and forth he would go for a season. And on one particular time home, his dad, Jesse, has something important for him to do. Now, it's also important to note that to this point, all we've seen about the life of David is that he's been anointed king, and his heart is to serve. Serving Saul, serving his father, even serving his brothers. Now, I want to read you a passage that I started with earlier, but I want to back up just a little bit, and we're going to get to David's call to service towards his brothers. Now, in 1 Samuel chapter 17, I don't have this up here, starting in 1, it says, "Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Socoh in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes Dammim, between Socoh and Azekah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah. And they drew up battle lines to meet the Philistines. Now, the Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites the other, and there was a valley in between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out from the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. That's roughly 9 foot 9 inches tall. This is a big guy. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. That's 125 pounds of armor around his chest. On his legs were bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. That's 15 pounds just in the tip of this spear. 15 pounds. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle?" See, Goliath is confused in this moment because they've met in this place to go to war. But the Israelites would come out and draw up battle lines, but would go no further. They stopped right there. And Goliath is confused, like, didn't we come out here for a particular purpose? That which I am ready for, but you don't seem to be. So why are you here? He's confused. Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. And if he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your servants. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our servants and serve us. Then the Philistine said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man, and let us fight each other." Now, on hearing this, on hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. That's a pretty profound statement. All of the army of Israel was dismayed and terrified. See, Goliath comes out as typical fashion when you go to war against another nation, and their particular way of battle initiated and started with them sending their strongest warrior and you sending yours, and there was a battle that would ensue between the two of them. Didn't always happen that way, but it was a pretty common practice, and Goliath is out there ready to go. Choose a man. Send someone out to fight. Now, that is a particular word that gets used in Hebrew. It's the word esh. Everybody say esh. Esh. It means very specifically man or male, in contrast to woman or female, or it can also be translated servant. So he's not asking for just anyone. He's asking for esh. Send me a man. Now, it's important to note that this is what happens. Jesse has, again, 8 total sons. the three oldest had gone into service with Saul to go to war. Now, Jesse's three oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. The firstborn, Eliab, the second, Abinadab, and the third, Shema. David was the youngest. The three oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. It was back and forth. And again, one day back while he was at home, tending his father's flocks, shepherding them, in that servant's heart between the two places, his dad comes out and says, I have a task for you. I need you to go and serve your brothers. They're out there on the battle lines, and I want you to go check on them, see how they're doing. I also want you to take some food out to them and just kind of assess the situation. Bring back a good report. I'm excited to hear how it's going. So David went, and while he was there, he noticed that the Philistines were on one hill, battle lines drawn. Israel was on the other hill, battle lines drawn. And then while he was there, he witnesses, because this happened for 40 days, every day, Goliath would step forward, breaking ranks, and come out to the valley and say, send me a man. Are we not here to fight? And then he begins to defile the armies of Israel. And so David hears this. He's out there bringing his brothers some supplies. He's out there checking on how things are going. And David witnesses what had been taking place day after day. And so David essentially stands back, looks around like, is no one going to do anything about this? Like, do you hear what he's saying? Like, someone has got to do something. But no one was doing anything. And so David begins to inquire of the situation that's unfolding in front of him. Why in the world is no one doing anything? When then he goes a little further and says, well, what's the prize? I mean, if someone goes out there and takes care of Goliath, is there something happening? Oh yeah, Saul's offering all kinds of stuff, this, that, and the other. And he's going around confirming, like, is this really what Saul's offering and nobody's doing anything? You gotta be kidding me. And when Eliab, remember, oldest brother, passed over, right? David's oldest brother heard him speaking with the men. He burned with anger at him and asked, what are you doing here? Why aren't you minding your own business? Tending that scrawny flock of sheep. I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is coming from someone communicating these words, right? It's unbelievable how Eliab was responding to David. He just came out to serve his brothers and see how things were going and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. Now, Saul catches word that someone is inquiring about standing face to face with Goliath. Now, if you're King Saul and none of your men are willing to go, and as king, you're unwilling to do your job, which was to go first and foremost, and you hear of someone who's inquiring about the opportunity or possibility of standing in front of Goliath, you're going to jump at that chance. And so Saul sends for David. He thinks, man, if someone is willing, then I'm ready to send them. Now, this is 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 32. I don't have this on the screen again. But David said to Saul, he's standing there in the presence of the king. Not the first time, remember, he's been back and forth between presence of Saul and tending and shepherding his father's flocks. But now he's standing in front of King Saul, who didn't do his job, and nobody else in the army is doing theirs. And David says to Saul, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. Saul replied, you are not able to go against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth. And then David says, well, I know we don't spend a lot of time together, but I just want to kind of give you some credentials. I want to let you know a little bit more of what happens in the private spaces, what maybe qualifies me to kind of stand here in this place. But David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. And I'm sure in that moment, Saul's like, I know. That's why you're not going. And when a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it. Now, you and I call that the cost of doing business, right? It's just one sheep, right? But David was a servant, and he understood that he had responsibility to care for the things that had been placed in his stewardship. And so it says that when a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it. I struck it and rescued the sheep from its mouth. Right? You ever been up in the hills and you're like, I really hope there are no mountain lions watching me right now. David was like, just try. I mean, he's ready. And so when it turned on me, because apparently this would happen, when it turned on me because it's mad it lost a meal, I seized it by its hair and struck it and killed it. I want you to know that nobody's watching David other than the Lord in this moment. He didn't gather an audience. He wasn't like, hey, everybody come. I see another mountain lion on the way. I see another bear come in my direction. I want everybody to see what I'm capable of doing. No one is around in this moment. And he says, your servant has killed both lion and a bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. At this, Saul said to David, go, may the Lord be with you, because I'm staying right here. And Saul recoils even further as David steps further forward. And then what Saul thought is, listen, young shepherd boy David, who I've been told is brave and is a warrior, which I've not witnessed in this place. You're clearly not going to be able to do this as you. You're going to need to do it more like me. So Saul gave him all of his armor and his weaponry and said, put this on. So David did. He walked around a bit and he said, I cannot go in these, he said to Saul, because I am not used to them. See, David has been functioning in a very different sort of way, not primarily up to this point as a warrior, but mostly as a shepherd. And he had a particular outfit that he would wear and particular weaponry that he would carry. Very different. And he says, I'm just not used to them. And so he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand. He chose 5 smooth stones from the stream. He put them in a pouch, the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. This morning, I want to encourage each of us that it's important to know that you can never win a battle that you were born for by trying to become someone else. See, sometimes we look around and we're like, yeah, if I could have this or access to that, or if I understood better the way that they do, then I would be able to fight this battle. See, sometimes we aren't content with who we are, so we try to become someone else. And if we attempt to fight the battles that we were born for by becoming someone else, we will lose every time. It's not how God created you. He didn't create you to be someone else. He created you uniquely to be you, every one of you. You can only win the battles you were born for with the unique strengths that God has given you, not the strengths he's given someone else. See, there's this one moment in the life of Jesus where he's asked by a teacher of the law, teacher, rabbi, he asks, what's the greatest commandment? He's testing Jesus to see if he knows as much as he does. And Jesus turns to him and says, well, it's to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. Now, I would contend that maybe as Christians, or if you're not yet a Christian, we may have a tendency to think about strength the least in this. Oh, my heart, I get it. My mind, I get it. My soul, my interior, yeah, I get it. But my strength, really? With my strength as well? That's important to God? Well, yes. Why? Because he has given you strengths. The word strength can be translated ability or force or might. Here's what I want to ask this morning. You have strengths, whether you know it or articulate it this way or not. And I'm talking to everybody. I'm not just talking to males in this moment, because everything I'm communicating, it has to do with all of us. But you have strengths. What are they? Have you ever taken the moment to step back and go, what are my strengths? Have you ever taken time to ask someone else, hey, I have trouble assessing my own self sometimes. What are my strengths? See, we live in a culture where it's really easy to point out weaknesses, isn't it? Like, oh yeah. It's really easy to point out weaknesses in ourselves. But it's harder to take time to say, what are my strengths? With your heart, your mind, your soul, and your strength. See, there's something very unique about you that's different than the person sitting next to you or behind you or in front of you. Your physical, emotional, and intellectual prowess, strengths. Your perseverance and determination, strengths. Your passion is a strength. Your desires can be strengths. Your ability to create wealth is a strength. Your willingness to serve is a strength. I want to encourage you to discover your strengths because they will help you step into your destiny, just like David. And there were things that happened in the private life of David that prepared him for a public moment that he didn't even see coming. I mean, he's simply there to serve. He's serving Saul. He's serving his father. He's serving the flocks. And then he serves his brothers. And in that moment, discovers something and realizes someone needs to do something about this. David understood some of his strengths. Here's how we know that. Because he willingly took off everything Saul gave him. I can't go in these. Saul, I'm not you, I'm me. I have a staff, I have stones, and I have a sling. And that will be enough. And as the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly. See, here's what I'm confident of. I love this phrase so much. I remember the first time, I feel like I read it a whole bunch, but then there was this one time I read it and thought, I've never noticed this before. That David ran quickly towards the battle line. See, when you're confident in the identity that God has given you, you are confident to be able to run towards the battles that you were created for. When you're not, you do what Saul does and you hunker down in your tent and you release the responsibilities that you've been given to someone else. But when you're confident of who God has created you to be, and listen, that takes a lifetime, I would contend. It doesn't happen overnight, but we need people around us to help identify our strengths and call them out. Because when you live into the strengths that God's given you and you move towards your destiny, do you know what happens? You draw other people into theirs. That's how it works. He ran quickly towards the battle line to meet him. He reached into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. You remember, he had a helmet on, right? It's not that his head was exposed. There were a few spots that were accessible. And here's what I love. David says, we're not going to read it today, but David says, the battle is the Lord's. And I love that the Lord loves partnership. So here's what David does. David reaches in. David loads the sling. David releases it. And who lands it? The Lord, God. Because the battle is the Lord's, but he's looking for people to partner with who are beginning to discover the strengths that they've been given uniquely and beautifully to become the person they are designed to be. And for our purposes this morning, again, I feel like I have liberty this morning to just speak to the men in the room or the boys or the dads and say, you have strengths. Discover them. And let other people help you discover them and use them to bless and build up people around you. Because when you do, that helps you step into the destiny that you've been born for. That's what David did. He slung that rock, hit the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down on the ground. Now, I got a couple little renderings here. Check this out. I don't know, it's probably not exact. This has him only at 9'6", by the way, but the actual measurements would be 9'9". Somebody didn't nail it there. But I mean, that's imposing at best, right? At worst, It's terrifying. I got a couple more little pictures here. Hey kid, put that rock down before someone gets hurt. Sending a boy to do a man's, look at that rock. It's right there. And then he realizes at the last moment, this isn't good. This isn't good. See, David understood the strengths that he had been given, and he was willing to run towards the battle line. I want to remind you this morning that the size of the obstacle before you is always determined by your understanding of the goodness of God. That makes sense? Let me repeat that. The size of the obstacle in front of you is always determined by your understanding of the goodness of God. Here's what I would contend, that Saul, as well as the soldiers, they stood up, hunkered back on that hill, telling God how big Goliath was. David goes and stands before Saul, takes off the things that were ill-fitting, puts on the things that he was born to operate within his strengths. And he begins to tell Goliath how big his God is. Those are very different ways to approach the world we live in. See, we live in a broken, busted up world where I think it's hard to be human and it's confusing to be a man. I'm supposed to do what? When? And how? I can read these books, I can watch these movies. I go to church, they don't say anything about it, so I don't know what to do. David ran and stood over him. And he took hold of the Philistine sword and he drew it from its sheath. And after he killed him, David wasn't done. He cut off his head with the sword. And when the Philistines saw, we leave that part out in Sunday school. But it is in the Bible. I understand it's graphic. But David is finishing the job with the Philistines' sword. And when the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. That's not the end of the story. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout. Here's what I love about that. What were these men doing along with Saul every time Goliath came out? It said that they were dismayed and they were terrified. They weren't stepping towards the battle line at all. But when David stepped forward, understanding his strengths, the shepherd and the warrior woven together in this moment, and he runs quickly towards the battle line and gains victory in this moment, it drew everyone else into the battle. See, that's what we need in our world today. We need people who are willing to actually run towards the battle that they're created for. Not cower, not try to ignore it, not reject it, but run towards it. And you know what happens. Listen, as a dad, here's the deal. I'm going to speak from my perspective. When I run towards the battles I was created for, I get to draw my kids into theirs. What they don't need is to see me running from them. What they don't need is to see me hiding from them. What they don't need is to see me do nothing. They need me to run towards the battle I was born for so that they're free to run towards the battle they're born for, not having to fight the one that I was born for that I was unwilling to fight. And so, maybe a bit of encouragement. If you want to learn how to slay giants, you got to get around some giant slayers. That's how it works. Like, it's tough to know how to do this on our own. And here's what I would contend, that it will always take a Goliath to reveal a David. Always. The heart of David was revealed when he ran towards that battle line. It takes a Goliath to reveal a David. It will always take a Goliath to reveal a David. And I want you to know that you're only going to win the battles that you're willing to fight. You're only going to overcome the fears that you're willing to face. And that means you do it in the strength that you've been given. And that is the strength of the Lord. Listen, as you understand your strengths and move towards your destiny, you draw other people's into theirs as well. I think that's what the world needs, for us to learn how to fight the battles we were born for. David had the heart of a servant, and he served with the heart of a king, as a shepherd and as a warrior. Remember, David was anointed the next king. He was shepherding his father's flocks. He was serving King Saul, and then he faced Goliath on the battlefield as a warrior. David had the heart of a servant, and he served with the heart of a king, a shepherd, and a warrior. So, as we fight these battles, I want you to know that I think about this sometimes with the space between Egypt and Canaan, right? Israel was kept captive for over 400 years in Egypt. God brought them out into this wilderness to worship, but he was planning to bring them into the land of Canaan. And here's what we know. In the wilderness, there were no giants. The giants resided in the promised land. The giants resided in a land flowing with milk and honey. And so here's maybe one way to test, like, am I where I'm supposed to be? Are there giants in your land? Because if there aren't giants in your land, you might be in the wrong place. You might have settled in a place that you're not supposed to be. Because anything worth having is going to be worth fighting for. And that means you're going to face giants. But giants are empowered by lies. See, we believe things about them that actually aren't true. And they're exposed by the truth. And they're always defeated by faith. That's how it works when you face a giant. And I mean, maybe there's an addiction in your life. Maybe there's a battle for a relationship. Maybe there's something happening within your job, or maybe with one of your children. There's a giant in front of you and you feel like, I don't know how to handle this. Sometimes it's because we let the lies lead the way, rather than zooming back out and understanding the truth. The truth of like, God, you're ultimately in charge. I can trust you. I actually don't have to worry, because worrying causes me to operate from my most limited self, and I can't think clearly when that happens. Because fear is a great indicator, but it's a terrible motivator. So what does it look like to do that? So I'm going to bring us to a close with this. There's a lot being said there, and you could try to draw out all kinds of things about what masculinity looks like. Well, in order to be a man, you've got to carry a sling. In order to be a man, you've got to stand before a king. In order to be a man, you've got to, and I think it's hard to be human and confusing to be a man. And so I want to clear this up for us this morning. You ready? Micah 6:8, there's this moment where God speaks to his people. And he says, he has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. There's three things, I think, that define masculinity. Not just masculinity, but it defines masculinity from God's perspective. It's to be able to act justly and to love mercy. That word can also be translated kindness, and to walk humbly. See, David, he served with the heart of a king. And you know what kings do? At least David as king, he acted justly. Now, don't get me wrong, he made a lot of mistakes. He's probably made a lot bigger mistakes than most of us have made in this room. And yet, the Bible says that this is a man after God's own heart. You mean you can screw up and still be a man after God's own heart? Well, yes. Yes, that's part of the point. We're not perfect, but we've been called to partner with God, to step into our destiny. And there's a couple ways in which we can do that. And I think if we're going to be people who serve with the heart of a king, it means we learn to act justly. We see something wrong and we're willing to try to help make it right. I remember a couple years ago, I was on a plane with Julie and we were sitting in these seats. By the way, today's our 20-year anniversary too. Like, yes. So I'm super pumped about that. What's that? And Father's Day. Yeah, I don't know. We're going to be celebrating all day. And we're sitting on the plane, and in front of us, there's two people, a woman on the aisle and a guy at the window. There's a seat between them that's empty. And as the plane takes off, we're doing our thing, and it's a little turbulent, and the woman in the seat is clearly uneasy. And the guy seems to notice that she's uneasy. She's got her earbuds in, and she's just, gripping the thing, and you can hear, okay. It's going to be all right. And the guy's like, hey, it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. So he hops up from that seat over to the middle seat, boop, and pops down. And I can see he has a wedding ring on his finger, and he begins to engage conversation with this woman who's clearly not his wife, okay? And as they begin to dialogue, she gets calmed down, and he's clearly comforting her. And at one point, she takes one of her earbuds, and she's like, I'm listening to this. You want to hear it? And they're sharing an earbud. Back before you could do some other fancy technology. And so they're sharing this and they're talking. And at one point, he's got his hand over hers and comforting her in all sorts of ways. And they begin to have deeper dialogue and conversation. I'm looking at Julie like, oh no. Like, this isn't okay. And then as the plane lands and everybody's starting to jostle around, he's like, hey, can I get your number? I'm like, no, this is not happening. And she's like, yeah, sure. And so, they exchange information and get off the plane. And I'm like, I got to do something. I got to say something. And so I hustle down the little ramp thing, and I get a hold of the guy, tap him on the shoulder. I'm like, hey, excuse me, sir. Are you married? He's like, yeah, why? I'm like, well, my wife and I happened to be sitting behind you, and we watched everything unfold. Can I just tell you that it won't be worth it? I know you're probably thinking all sorts of things, and I don't know what your marriage is like right now, but it won't be worth it. And I realized, I'm either going to get punched, cussed out, or thanked. I'm not sure which, but I kind of don't care. And he said, yeah, okay, thanks. And then just walked on. I don't know what he did from there, but here's what I know. When we see something that is not right, we should be okay doing something about it. And so David was someone who always acted justly. Not always, mostly acted justly. But not only that, David served with the heart of a shepherd. And that means he loved mercy, and he was good at it. The word love is the word ahava. That's what it is in the Hebrew. And it's all about commitment, connection, and partnership. See, having a commitment to kindness is way more masculine than carrying offense or bitterness. It's way more enjoyable to love mercy than it is to harbor unforgiveness. And then finally, David had the heart of a warrior. He served with the heart of a warrior, and he walked humbly with his God. Now, we don't live in a culture that values humility, but I want to promise you that it's not a weakness, it's a strength. And there's nothing else like humility. It doesn't take strength to be prideful. That only takes weakness. It doesn't take strength to oppress people. That only takes fear. See, true humility can be experienced with understanding the strength and the power that you've been given and using it to the blessing of others. David, at the end of the day, was a servant. He served with the heart of a king, a shepherd, and a warrior. His heart was one of servanthood. And I want to remind us this morning, when I think about masculinity, it's all about servanthood. It's not about dominating. It's not about slinging stones or cutting off people's heads. I mean, that's an illustration in the Bible, but what I want you to know is that David served with the heart of a king, the heart of a shepherd, and the heart of a warrior. And he changed the world that he lived in. Because servanthood is not a season of life. It's a way of life and is the mark of true masculinity. And so, boys, men, fathers, I want to challenge you today to this Micah 6:8 way of living that will reorient the way you engage the world, the way you engage the people you work with or live with or encounter on a regular basis, because the world needs you to be you and to allow masculinity to look like this. That means there will be great victory.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this message and would like to learn more, you can join us in person or online for services at 10 a.m. on Sundays. We would also love to connect with you. You can fill out a Connect card on our website at collectivechurch.org and also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.